Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Yud Gimel. I will warn you from the beginning of today's shiur that it's a bit of a complicated shiur. Try to focus as best as you can, and using the study guide will be incredibly helpful. There's a bunch of different charts, and I will do my best to make everything as clear as possible. So we're going to start from the Mishna just so that we get everything straight from the beginning. We're going to go back to Yud Bet Amabet at the bottom. Matzah shitrei chov. So let's go back and discuss. Just again, I want to have all the concepts clear so that we understand what's going on. If you're missing some details of the background, it's going to be hard. We have a general promissory note. What usually happens is the malveh, the lender, keeps the document. Let's just assume it's a loan, keeps the document until it gets collected. That's the whole idea. We talked about this before, like a credit slip. You know, if you lose it, well, we lose everything. So the malveh is going to be very careful to keep that document. As soon as it's paid back, either you tear it and then write a shovar, perhaps also like a receipt that the loveh paid, and the loveh keeps the receipt, or theoretically the loveh could keep the document, and that's proof I paid it, here it's in my hands. What if you find a document in the middle of the street? Now, there's several possibilities. Either it fell from the malveh, right, the borrower, the lender, or it fell from the debtor, the loveh, the borrower, or maybe it was never actually a real document. Maybe it was never used, and that's why it's in the middle of the street. Maybe they wrote it out and then decided, oh, you know what, we're not going to do the loan, and then put it in the garbage. Right nowadays, we use a shredder, but nobody shredded it. They left it in the garbage. Somebody took it out of the garbage. By the way, we have all these sugya where people ruffled through the garbage. You know, could be it came out of the garbage and they took it and reused it. Or the sofer said, I'll use it for somebody else and I'll cross out the names, and kept it there and somehow it blew away. Any kind of thing could happen. Or it could be that it was written, but maybe there was something wrong with the document. And we're going to get into that the fact that we find it on the street already raises what we would say, you know, a red light, like something might not be right here. Because if it was really a good, valid document, the lender, the creditor, would have kept it and would have been very careful about it. The fact that we find it on the street already raises a lot of questions. So our Mishnah very simply sets up a machloket between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. It's very simply, it's kind of not really so simple, but Rabbi Meir basically is going to distinguish between two types of documents. Now we have to get into a whole other thing, which is property liens. So we've learned this many times, but I'll review in case you're newer to Gemara, which is, there's actually and this is going to be part of our machloket in our sugya. Let's talk about even a loan without a document. A loan without a document is called a milveh al peh, and you can collect it, but it's much harder to collect because it's just an oral agreement. You're going to have a harder time proving it in court. Maybe you can bring witnesses, but it's much harder. And you certainly can only collect it from money the loveh has in their possession. If you're going to repossess something, right, it's going to only be from their own property. That's called nechasim b'nei cholin, free property, as opposed to nechasim shu'abadin, which means lien property that there's a lien on. So what does that mean? That means if we have a document, and now we're going to distinguish between two different types of documents, and not everyone's going to distinguish because there might not be a difference. One opinion actually that we normally see, and this is definitely not Rabbi Meir, is something called achrayut ta'ut sofer. That means, okay, this is something that comes up a lot, so you should get it clear, which is, if you don't write in a document that, okay, if the document just says so-and-so is loaning money to so-and-so, and they didn't write, and the loan has a property lien on it. Now, what would that mean if the loan had a property lien? What it means is if the loan was taken in January, and that was the day of the loan, that was the day the agreement was signed, any property from January, let's say I gave you a loan, any property that you sell from January, let's say it was January 1st, from January 1, I could collect from. So if you sold it to Jane, I could go to Jane and I can collect the land from Jane. Okay, now, how is that fair to Jane? Because Jane, her job when she goes to buy land is to check, just like we would go check, right? Does anybody have a claim to the land? Now, I have a claim to the land either because it says in the document that I have a claim to the land, and that's Rabbi Meir. That we're going to distinguish between, does it say I have a lien on the property in the document, or does it not? The rabbis are of the opinion, and we'll see this later, at least one possible explanation of the rabbis, is that achrayut ta'ut sofer, meaning If you didn't put a guarantee, a property lien into the document, it was a mistake on the part of the scribe. And that means that it's there anyway, okay? Anytime you have it, that's generally the opinion. It's going to be confusing today because Rabbi Meir is definitely not of that opinion. But anytime you don't write it anytime you have a milvet b'shtar, a loan with a document, you can always collect from someone with property that was sold, because that's the assumption. That's why you wrote it down, if not for that. So Rabbi Meir doesn't think that. He thinks that if you wrote there's a lien on the property in the document, you can collect from property. If you didn't write it, you can't. So that's why he has this distinction in the Mishnah. So let's start out now with the Mishnah. If you find these documents on the ground, promissory notes, if there was a lien on the property, then don't return it to the malveh, because he could collect it from buyers. Okay, we don't know yet what the issue is. Of course he could collect from buyers. What's the problem? And what's the situation? Does the lovet claim I already paid back the loan, and is that our concern? Or did the lovet not say I didn't pay back the loan yet? Well, then really what's the concern? Of course, the malveh, of course the creditor could collect from lien property. That's what it says. So something doesn't make sense here. If there is no lien on property, it doesn't say anything about a property lien in the document, well, then we can return it, because we're not worried, we're not worried that they're going to collect from people shelo kedin, right? We're not worried they're going to go collect from the buyers, because you can't collect from the buyers if it doesn't have achrayut in the shtar. It doesn't say there's property lien, then they can't collect from property. Now, that's Rabbi Meir. Okay, the rabbis, we're not going to go into the rabbis just yet, but the rabbis say, no matter what, you can't return this to the malveh, because any case, he can collect things improperly. Okay, so we don't know what any of this is, and the Gemara immediately says, we don't understand this. Okay, it's not just us. B'mayas kinam, what's the case? So I'm back again on Yubed Amud Bet at the bottom. Ilem akisha chayav modeh. If, again, there's two possibilities. Either we find this on the ground, okay, the malveh says it's mine, I'm owed the money, and the lovet says, you're right, I owe you the money. Or the lovet denies it and says, I don't owe you the money. Either there was no loan, or I paid it back already. Okay, so we're trying to flesh out both options. Now, what we're going to focus exclusively on until we get to Amud Bet is just Rabbi Meir's opinion. So we're going to say, if he's chayav modeh, if he admits, well, if there's achrayut nechasim, if there's lien property, then why, if the lovet, the borrower says, yeah, I owe you the money, so what's the problem? They'll collect from people I sold, if let's say I said before, you borrowed the money, you sold land to Jane, so they'll collect from Jane, that's fine. You admit that you haven't given back the money, so you still owe the money, they'll go to Jane, they'll get the money. But chayav modeh, and if you don't admit, well then, why would we return it if it doesn't have a lien? What does it matter if there's a lien on property or not? If you claim you paid back the money already, then what? We believe you. Remember, you have to take a shvuat hesed. But you can be believed, especially because we found this on the ground. It's not in the hands of the malveh. You're believed. If you're believed, so they say, we'll give it back to the malveh. Now, if we give it back to the creditor can't collect from lien property because it doesn't have a lien. That's fine. So they're not going to collect from Jane. But they can collect from you, and that's not fair. You claim you paid it back, and we believe you. So this distinction makes no sense in Rabbi Meir. Okay, so now we're going to go to the words la'olam. La'olam kishachayav modeh. Really the case is, and this is the first way we're going to explain the sugya, the case is the lovet admits. The lovet says, you're right, it's a loan, and I didn't pay you back. So now we have to figure out, well then, what's the problem? The malveh can collect the money from Jane. Okay, so why can't, right? What's the problem? So they answer the following. And we did this yesterday, but I really just wanted to review from the beginning so you have it all clear in your heads. Maybe we wrote this document in Nisan, but I actually ended up giving you the money only 6 months later. And then the document says Nisan, and you're going to collect the money from Nisan, right? Meaning when I go to collect the money of the loan, I'll collect, you sold to Jane in, let's say, ER, the next month. But the loan never happened till Tishrei. I can't go collect that loan from Jane because when Jane bought property from you, the loan hadn't happened yet. So that's our concern. And that's only a concern relating to property, and that resolves our issue, because we need an issue where it's only about property. Of course, if we have a document that says you borrowed money, the date is irrelevant if I'm going to collect the money directly from you, because that's b'nei chorin, that's free money. I can collect it no matter what, as long as there was a loan. And we're not worried there's no loan because you admit there's a loan. Okay, we're not worried this never happened. So then they say, wait a minute. Then we have a problem with this answer, though. Then how can you ever collect from a document with a date? If we're always worried that maybe they signed the document before the date the actual loan happened, then you can never collect from property that was liened. You can never collect from Jane any loan, because we never know exactly what date it happened. The only proof we have of the date is the date it was signed. And if you think that there's a concern that maybe it was written on one day, but actually the loan happened on a different day, then you can never, ever collect property. So why is it only in this case that we say you can't collect from property, but in other cases you could? To which the answer, very simple answer, which we're going to go back to a few times today, kol shtari lo rei, hanu rei. And this is why I said in the beginning. A normal document, if the malva has it in hand, we don't have any sort of red lights like something's wrong here. So we assume if it has the date, that was the date the loan happened. Here we have something strange, which is we have a document on the ground in the middle of nowhere. Why would the malva, because again, the malva is super careful about keeping that document and always knowing where it is, so the malva can get their money back. But in this case, it's on the ground. That already says something's not right here. Because if it really was a good document, the malva would have kept close guard on it. The fact that we found it on the street might already tell us something's wrong with this document. And maybe that's what's wrong, that this is what we call a shtar mukdam. It's a shtar that has a date that's earlier from the time that it actually happened. And maybe that's why the malva didn't care about it, because he knew there's no way he's really going to get this back. And that's why we're worried that we're not going to allow this to be returned to the malva, because they might take money from Jane when really not supposed to, because the malva maybe only happened, the loan really only happened later. Now we're going to have another question. Now we're going to have a problem with the Mishna in Bava Batra. The Mishna in Bava Batra says, you can write a shtar for the love. Okay, this assumption that we just made, we're basically worried about what? We're worried that the date doesn't match the date of the actual loan, that it was written on a certain date and the loan only happened later. We're now going to see from Mishna and Bava Batra, we are absolutely not concerned about that possibility. And then we're going to have to figure out why not. Why are we worried about it in our Mishna, the way we explained our Mishna, but not worried about it in a different case? So it says in the Mishna, a lova can go to a scribe, someone who's borrowing money, ask the scribe to write it up, have the witnesses sign on it, even if the person who's loaning the money isn't there. Now, according to what we just said, why would we allow for that? If we allow for that, we could end up with a problem with the dates, because nobody who signed on the shtar actually saw the loan happen. They just have the lova's word that it's going to happen. Now, you might say, why would the lova be writing this if not, right? But how could you write this? Maybe the lova wants to get this written because he really wants the loan to happen. So he's getting all the pieces in place. But we didn't see the malva. We didn't see the person who's paying the money. Maybe they never put up the money. So, and based on this document, now, it doesn't hurt the lova, but what does it hurt? It hurts anyone who buys money from the lova, because the lova could pull out this document and say, oh, take it from these people, right? Or the malva, right? When the malva later pulls out the document, the creditor is going to go collect it from people who it's actually not, right? When Jane goes to buy land from me, she has to check what loans I have outstanding. That loan wasn't outstanding in Nisan or ER, right? It was only outstanding in Tishrei, but the document says Nisan. So how could we allow a document to be written without the malva being there and knowing the loan actually happened? So it seems we're clearly not worried. So how do we explain that our Mishna is worried about it, the way we explained our Mishna anyway, and that Mishna is not? So for this, we're going to have two answers. The first answer, I'm a Rav Asi. I'm going to have Rav Asi, I'm going to have Abaye. And we're going to bring Rav Asi, we're going to ask a question of Rav Asi, resolve it. Then Abaye is going to say, I'm going to give a different answer because I didn't really like the answer that Rav Asi gave to hit the difficulty on him. And then we're going to have 2 questions on Abaye. Bishtarei hakna. He says very simply, the Mishna in Bava Batra was talking about unique types of documents. What does that mean? What's a shtar hakna? Rashi says it's a shtar where basically the malveh says, I'm giving you rights to my property from today. I don't care. Okay, now maybe why would they do this? Probably they're desperate for the loan. And they say to the malveh, listen, give me the money when you give it to me, but I'm willing to basically commit my money from today. And then when Jane goes to check, she knows I have this document because this is a public document. And it doesn't only go into effect when the loan actually happens. It goes into effect right now. And that's a unique shtar. The hashia beid nafshe, because the lova said I'm committing from now. And that's why there's no concern. You can write a shtar hakna'ah without the malva there. But you can't write a regular shtar because of the same problem. Okay, if it wasn't a unique shtar hakna'ah, that would be like our Mishna. Ihachi. So then if so, matnitin dekatane. And our Mishnah says, if it has a lien on a property lien on it, you can't return it. This is just a quote of how we explained our Mishnah. Okay, and we said it's when the lova admits there is a loan. And what's the concern? Now, I already said our Mishnah is going to be without shtar now, but right now they're going to ask a question. They're going to say the following. If there's 2 types of documents, one that's hakna'ah, where you commit from the day of the document, and one that's not. So when our Mishnah didn't specify, why don't we just say, why do we say simply, don't return it to the malveh because he'll take land maybe, that wasn't supposed to go to him from Nisan when really it's only supposed to be his from Tishrei. Why don't we just say next day, let's look into it. Let's see what kind of document was this. If it's a shtar hakna, then of course you can give it back to the malveh because the lova committed from Nisan. We're not worried about a mistake in the date. Hashia beid lenafshe, like we just said in Bava Batra. Ibishtar delo hakna, and if it's not a shtar hakna, lekalamechash, there's no problem either because ha'amarta ki lekamalve bahade lo katvina. Now they say a better question. They say, wait. If it's not a shtar hakna'ah, then it actually should be fine to give it back to the malveh for a different reason. Because what? If it's not, what's our concern in our Mishnah according to the Gemara? Our concern is maybe it was written in Nisan and the loan only happened in Tishrei. But according to the Mishna and Bava Batra, that would never happen if it's not a shtar hakna'ah. Because a shtar hakna'ah, they would never write it for the lova if the malva wasn't there giving the money. So you would never have a case like this because the law negates it. The law prevents that kind of case from happening. The law says don't write the document unless the loan is happening right then and there, unless the malva is there and the malva is giving the money. So if it's not, it's in a shtar hakna'ah, that could happen. But it won't be a problem because in a shtar hakna'ah, you committed, I'm giving the money from Nisan, even though the loan might only happen in Tishrei. In a shtar that's not hakna'ah, it would never happen. So you would never have a case like this because the law is, you can't do this. Now, you might say just because the law is that way doesn't mean it won't happen. Okay, that we're going to get to. So, Amar le Rav Asi, afagav d'shtari lav hakna'ah, hilei kamal b'vadei lo katvinan, even though you're right, that you wouldn't write this kind of document really, but matnitin kevan dinafal itrale v'chashina dil ikreu kativ. Okay, and that's really what I said, which is our Mishnah, remember, goes back to how we started. Our Mishnah has a problem because it's found on the street. That already raises a problem. It says something might be wrong with this document. Why else would we find it on the street? So even though the law is a sofer can't write a document unless, and the witnesses can't sign unless the malva is there, maybe this one, maybe the malva really wasn't there. And maybe the loan really didn't happen. And that's the whole reason why this is on the street. Okay? This is on the street because there's a problem. And that raises a red light and tells us maybe there's something wrong and maybe this was done against the law. Okay? That's our explanation for Rav Asi, which is a little bit of a stretch. And that's what Abaye, they're going to say when Abaye brings this alternative answer, it's because Abaye thought this was a bit of a stretch. In other words, again, once you have the Mishna and Bava Batra, it precludes you from having this, it precludes you from being concerned that this will ever happen. Okay, and that's why Abaye says that's not going to be my explanation. So again, we started with, let me just make it really clear what we're up to. The Mishna we explained must be a case of Chayav Modeh. The Lova admits, and then the question becomes, what's the difference between having a property lien or not having a property lien? And we explain that it's all a concern of collecting land from the wrong date. And therefore, it's only when there's property lien. If there's no property lien, there's no concern. We're only worried about a wrong date. To which we said, but in Bava Batra, we're not worried about a wrong date. And now we're in that sugya of contradiction between the Mishnah Bava Batra and our Mishnah. First resolution is, Rav Asi says that's one type of document where you commit yourself immediately. That's why there's no concern of the wrong date. Our Mishnah is where you're worried about the wrong date because it's not a document where you commit yourself right away. And it's a document where it could have been written 6 months before. Now, the halacha says you're not allowed to do that kind of thing, but the fact that we found this on the ground makes us think that maybe it was written incorrectly. That's basically what we've done so far. Abaye gives a different answer. Abaye amal, edav bechatumav zachin lo. Afilu shtari delav akna. He says, you don't have to make this distinction. This is a shtar akna. That's not a shtar akna. Let's give a different answer. He says, when the edim sign, doesn't matter what kind of shtar it is, they commit, in other words, it doesn't matter if it's a shtar hakna or not. It doesn't matter if it's a shtar where the lova said, I'm committing from the state. As soon as the witnesses sign, that commits the lova to that date. So if we were standing in Nissan and I loaned you money, but we just talked about the loan. You had the document written up. You had the witnesses sign it, and the loan only happened 6 months later. As soon as the witnesses sign, that commits you to that date, which means, and again, it makes sense actually, because what's the issue when Jane goes to buy the land from you? She has to check, are there any documents? And she finds a document. She doesn't know whether the loan actually happened or didn't happen. Witnesses signed on it. You committed from that date. Okay, so that makes the shtar valid from that date, even if the loan happened later. The edim, the witnesses' signatures, commit you to that date. So now, mishum de kashele. Now, what motivated him to say this? And this I already told you. It's because he didn't accept Rav Asi's answer to that question we asked against Rav Asi. Okay, the reason he didn't accept Rav Asi and he gave a different explanation was mishum de kashele, because it was difficult for him, this thing we said before. Kevan de amarta b'shtarei lava kna'a. Since you said it's talking about a shtar that's not a shtar kna'a, you would never have a shtar like that because we never write shtarot like that without the malva. First of all, even though we say people do things against the law, usually the scribes only wrote documents legally because the scribes were knowledgeable people and they knew, and this was their job. So they weren't going to write it, and therefore, we're not worried that maybe somehow that happened. And that's why he doesn't explain the Mishnah that way. So now we're going to have two questions on Abaye. One is from a Mishnah that's upcoming on Daf Yud Chet. That's the first one. And then we're going to ask a question about our Mishnah. How does it work with Abaye? Because right now we're just resolving what's the case in Bava Batra, he said. He didn't really explain what about our Mishnah. So we'll get back to that. First question. Okay, you can see we're going to continue along this theme of finding documents on the ground. So you find documents that, again, the document has a value of money, right? It's not like finding a lost item like a ring, but it's finding something that has potential value. So you find a get of a woman, you find a shiur of an eved, okay, an emancipation document. These don't necessarily have financial value. Daitike, those are gifts like a will of somebody, of someone who died. Matana, a gift, or a shoval, which is a receipt that something was paid. Hareze lo yachzil. If you find these on the ground, you don't give them back to the people whose names are in them. Why? Maybe the husband decided to write a get and then changed his mind. He decided to free a slave, changed his mind. Maybe he wrote a will, decided to write a different will instead. Okay, there's all sorts of reasons. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but all sorts of possibilities. Again, these are things people generally keep in a very safe place. Like, see, someone wrote in the chat, maybe it felt out of their pocket. People don't walk around with these things in their pockets. They save it in their homes in a protected space. They wouldn't end up on the street. Now they say, but according to Abaye, that makes no sense, because what do we say? Obviously, if you find these documents on the ground, they're invalid if there's no signatures. no one would even think that it's valid and we can collect it. We must be talking about documents with signatures. Now, if Abaye says, as soon as the edim, if I decide to give you a gift and I write a document, I'm giving you a gift and I sign witnesses on it and I never give it to you, according to Abaye, that gift is yours because the witnesses already gave you rights to it. So if I change my mind and don't give it to you, it's irrelevant. So they say, no, that's not exactly true. We're going to distinguish. Now, think about the cases. We're comparing a Mishna Bava Batra, which is basically saying, don't write a document without the malveh there, okay? Versus a case where we find something on the ground. Now, there's a big difference. Because now, in the case of Bava Batra, what we're really talking about is the malveh produces a star, or we worry this was written without his presence and maybe the date is off or not, okay? That's different. When we said in that case, that's when it got to the hands of the malveh. At some point, the malveh had it in his hands. This wasn't the case where it was lost on the ground and we're worried, did the malveh ever have it? But if it never, ever got to their hands, we can't say that. Okay, so therefore, it's not true. Doesn't mean that if I decide to write you a gift, as soon as I sign the witnesses, it's yours. It's not true. It's that when I give it to you, and once it's in your hands, then the edim zachu. So if it was, let's say, lien to property, and we go by the date in the document, even if I gave it to you 5 weeks later, right? If I loaned you money 5 weeks later, we still go by the document and the date in the document, but that's only if you got the document. If you never received the document, then no. And that's the first question against Abaye. Here we're going to get to a more basic question or more related to us because it contradicts our Mishnah. So now we have to explain our Mishnah. What did we say? Our Mishnah is a case, this is just a review of the first line, the first answer we saw. Our Mishnah is a case where you admit there was a loan. What's our concern? Why does Rabbi Meir distinguish achrayut and achrayut? Because if it's linked to property, we're worried the date is wrong. Now, according to Abaye, there is no wrong date because as soon as the witness is signed in Nisan, as long as the loan actually happened and you admit, you as the borrower admit the loan happened, so that's not our concern here, we go by Nisan, so there's no problem of date. So Bishlam ala Rav Asi damar b'shtari aknayata mokele b'shtari delav aknayata. According to Rav Asi, it's very simple, and this is review. Rav Asi said there's shtar hakna'ah, which goes by the date of the document, and then there's shtar that isn't hakna'ah, and there we don't go by the date in the document, and that's why we're worried. We go by the date that it actually happened, and we're worried about that date, that maybe it's off. But according to Abaye, how can we possibly explain it? So now we're going to have to explain our Mishnah that there's a different concern. According to Rav Asi, the concern is, as we said, maybe the wrong date. Abaye can't be concerned for that because again, I have rights to collect land from Nisan, even if the loan happened in Tishrei, according to Abaye, because the witness is signed on that date, that gives me rights from that date. So he's worried about a conspiracy. What's he worried about? What's the case? I pull out we find a document on the street that says you owe me money. I obviously say you owe me the money. You say I owe Michelle the money. Okay, all's good. But maybe you don't owe me the money. Maybe you're lying. Now, what would your motivation be for lying? Well, you'd only have a motivation for lying, and this is why Rabbi Meir says this, if it's lien, there's property lien. Why? If there's no property lien, if you claim you still owe the money, I'm going to take the money from you, and that's going to be, you're going to pay double. But let's say you were strapped for money. You sold your land to Jane, and now you want your land back. So what do? You say, look, I'll never get my land back, but maybe I could get half my land back. I'll go in a conspiracy with Michelle. We'll claim that I actually never paid the money back. Michelle will demand the land back from Jane. I'll get the land back. We'll split it 50-50. You'll take half, I'll take half. I don't know why they're not worried that Jane will figure this out down the road, but We'll split it 50-50, and in that way, you'll get your land back, okay? And that's what we're concerned about. And that's why we don't, even when you admit, okay, the borrower admits that they haven't paid the loan back, we still don't give it back to the malveh because they can theoretically go get land back from Jane against the law, okay? They could do a conspiracy. Now, I want you to be careful about the flow of the Gemara here, because there's something a little bit different. We're going to have a new approach now to understanding the Mishnah, but it's going to come about within Abaye. You'll see this right now. L'Shmuel da'amar lo cheshin l'pera'on l'knunya. Now we're going to go to a different opinion. Shmuel is never concerned for this knunya. He's not worried about a conspiracy that we're going to do this kind of thing. Doesn't think people will do that. Maybe for the reason I said, that it'll be obvious at some point. So you're not going to do that. So my Meir, how can he explain the Mishnah? So therefore, if he holds like Rav Asi, it's very simple. He says the Mishnah Bava Batra is shtar kna'ah. Our Mishnah is not shtar kna'ah. We're worried, maybe Nisan Tishrei, and that's his explanation. No knunya there. But ele isavar ka'Abaye, and this is how we're going to get to it. It's a bit of a strange one. We don't know which Shmuel held. Shmuel lived before Abaye and Rav Asi, but if he held like Abaye, he viewed that, okay, that Edav b'chatumav zachinlo. In other words, the question is, what did he hold about this concept of Edav b'chatumav zachinlo? Rav Asi didn't think that was true. Abaye did think it's true. If Shmuel agreed with Abaye about that point, then how could he possibly explain our Mishnah? There is no way to explain our Mishnah unless you say it's a knunya. So it's a conspiracy. But he doesn't hold like conspiracy. So my Meir, and therefore they're going to suggest, and this is just an important distinction, which is we're not going to say this is how Shmuel reads the Mishnah, but we're going to suggest that a different possible reading of the Mishnah, if Shmuel held Edav v'chatumav zachinlo, he would have to read the Mishnah differently. And now we're going to go with a totally different approach to the Mishnah. Until now, we assumed that you as the borrower admitted that you owe me the money. Now we're going to suggest that according to Shmuel, if he held like Abaye, but didn't worry about a knunya, then if you admit to the loan, of course we could give it back to me without a problem. So he would have to say, Shmuel Shmuel is going to say the Mishnah must be talking about a case where the borrower claims, I don't owe any money. I paid it back, or there was no loan, and basically says no. So now we have to figure this out. But remember, if you claim there was no loan, then we believe you. So why would we ever give it back, right? What did we say? We give it back in a case where there's no property lien. We don't give it back in a case where there is a property lien. Okay, so we don't give it back in a case where there is a property lien. We get that because you'll claim it either from me or from, I will claim it. I lent you the money. I will claim it either from you or from someone you sold the money to, and that you claim it was paid back already. So the problem is, why are you going to get it? As the creditor, am I going to get it back if you claim it was paid? So what if there's no property lien? Okay, so I can't go collect it from Jane, but I could collect it from your property directly. I could go to the borrower and get the money back, but you claim it was paid. So how can we allow this to happen? To which they answer, and here we have something that goes against what we saw previously. If we explain Shmuel in this manner, it fits with some other statement Shmuel said about Rabbi Meir. Remember, all we're trying to do right now is explain Rabbi Meir. Shmuel, Omer haya Rabbi Meir. He says that Rabbi Meir was known to say, "Shtar chov she'ein bo achrayut nechasim, ein goveh lo mi meshavdeh v'lo mi bnei charei." This is the polar opposite of achrayut ta'ut sofer. Achrayut ta'ut sofer means if you didn't write a warranty, a land, a property lien in the document, it's as if it's there. Rabbi Meir is on the opposite end, according to Shmuel. Now, before, what did we think that Rabbi Meir holds? If you wrote it, there's a lien. If you didn't write it, there's no lien. Now he says, if you didn't write it, not only, right? He says, shtar chov, if you don't have achrayut nechasim, what did we think? Okay, there's no lien, but you can collect it you can demand the money from the person, right? From the borrower. I could go to you. Even if there's no property lien, I can at least go to you and get it. Comes Rabbi Meir, according to Shmuel, and says, This is like an oral agreement. Basically, if I don't write, there's a property lien. Not only is it, right, we're not going to go with the rabbis who say the opposite, which is it's as if you wrote it. No, it actually turns it into a non-document. It's as if you don't even have a document in which to collect. And that's why, now here, it's going to get a little bit funny. That's why we can give it back to the malveh, because the malveh can't collect based on this anyway. So now the Gemara is going to ask the obvious question. Well, we find this document on the ground. I claim you owe me money and I want it back. And I dropped it. You claim I paid it back already. Now, if we give it back to me, if it has no property lien, then we can give it back to me because I can't collect from it. Well, if I can't collect from it, then why are we giving it back to me in the first place? To which Amar Rabbi Natan, let's all pizza the chutosha malveh. Now, we brought this up as a joke the other day. I was like, what's he going to do with it? Use it to cover his jug? Now this is the answer. I could use it, the way I thought of it, like aluminum foil, right? I could cover my food with it. Okay, I could cover my jug with it. So I get it to use the piece of paper. To which the Gemara says, if that's the case, if all it is a piece of paper, well, let's all pizza chutosha love. Maybe you should get it back. Why me, not you? To which the Gemara answers, and with that we'll move to Amabet. Lovehu damar lo yudvarim me'olam. You're not going to get it back because you claim there was no loan, or I paid the money back. This loan is irrelevant. So I'm the one who claims it's something. So I get it back to use this aluminum foil. Okay, that's a bit of a funny kind of answer, but that's where we're up to right now. So I want to just review before we move on, because this is really important to understand. What's nice is the second part of our daf is a little bit of review, but you'll see, not exactly in the form of review, but it will review all the concepts that we discussed. So on the second side of the sheet, I made a chart that basically reviews what we did so far. We have Rabbi Meir, who distinguishes between a document that has achrayut, has property lien, or doesn't have property lien. If it has a property lien, you cannot give it back to the malveh. Because why? Okay, right, we'll see in a minute. If it doesn't have a property lien, you can give it back to the malveh. So we saw two basic possibilities, and within the first option, we had two understandings. Either the borrower admits that they still owe the money, or the borrower doesn't admit. Within the borrower admitting, we had two interpretations. Either, according to Rav Asi, it's not a shtar hakna'ah, which means the lova didn't commit from the date it was written. The lova only committed from the day, right? The land is only liened from the day that the loan was taken. And there's a concern that maybe the dates are off. And, right, the fact that in Bava Batra there's no concern is because that's a unique shtar hakna'ah. But a shtar that's not a kna'ah, there could be a problem with the date. Abaye said, and again, there really shouldn't be because you're not really allowed to do this, but, maybe they did anyway, and that's because this is on the ground and we're worried. Abaye says, even a shtar kna'ah, it's fine. It's what's the problem? We're worried that the reason you admit there is still a loan is not really the truth. Maybe you really pay back the money, and we're worried that we're doing a conspiracy so you could get your land back. According to Shmuel, or at least again, it's not that Shmuel says this, it's that if Shmuel doesn't agree with Rav Asi about the Bava Batra contradiction and how to resolve it, and he holds like Abaye, that really the aging make the date, and you can collect based on the date no matter when the loan happened, then how could he explain our Mishna? Because he doesn't think there's a kanunya possibility of conspiracy. Then Shmuel says the Mishna is in a case where the lova doesn't admit, the borrower doesn't admit. But why do we return it then? We return it, right? So again, if the lova doesn't admit, we can't return it if there's lien property, because then the malveh theoretically will go collect from lien property and there'll be an issue. But if it doesn't have achrayut nechassim, we can give it back. And that's right. And then what's the issue? Well, we give it back to the lender just so that they can have something to cover their pots with or something. Okay, but not that they can really do anything with it. Okay, because it's a useless document, we can actually return it. A little bit ironic. Now those were all Amoraim that live in Babylonia. Now we're going to move to Israel. And in Israel, we're going to have the same issues coming up and differences of opinion, but it's going to come in a different format. What we're going to do right now is we're going to see, you can see from the second next chart on the page, they're going to talk about not just Rabbi Meir, But what's the disagreement between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis? In what case do they disagree? In what case they agree? And you can see from the chart that it's the opposite. Each one thinks they agree in one case and disagree in another. We're back to the two cases up. Does the Lovet admit that they're still a loan, or does the Lovet not admit? And with this, we'll review all the concepts we discussed today. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Machloket, I'm going to leave the chart up. Machloket b'she'ein chayav modeh. The machloket is when the person who's obligated, meaning the borrower, does not admit. De Rabbi Meir saval shtar she'ein bo achrayut nechasim eino govet lomi meshabde v'lomi bnei chare. Okay, this is Shmuel. The Rabbi Meir holds you can't, if you didn't write a lien, it's as if there's no document. And that's why we can return it, right? Because anyway, all you can do is use the cover for your pot. So therefore, all I could do with it. So we return it to the malveh. V'Rabbanan savre, the rabbis disagree about that point. The rabbis say, but the rabbis say, what are you talking about? Of course, you can collect it from free property, meaning if it doesn't have a lien with land, then you can still collect it from directly. I can go to the borrower, to you, and I can collect it from your property. And therefore, we don't give it back because you claimed you paid it back. And therefore, I can't get this document back, according to the rabbis, because we're worried that you already paid it. And then I would try to collect based on it. I'd be able to collect, and that's wrong because I don't really owe the money. But if you admit that there was a loan here, then divrei hakol yachzir. If I claim it's mine and I'm owed the money, and you claim it's mine and I'm owed the money, then of course we get it back. And they're not worried at all, according to Rabbi Elazar. Neither one is worried about a conspiracy. That's a little of a stretch. Like we always say about conspiracy theories, right? But come on, that's really what people are doing. Rabbi Yochanan, I mean, I know people believe in conspiracy theories. I'm saying if you're against conspiracy theories and you say, okay, come on, no one's doing that. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, machloket k'shchayav modeh. He's going to say the opposite. The machloket is in a case where the borrower admits, okay? Chayav modeh. The one who's obligated admits that there's an obligation. And then obviously we're going to have one person who's worried about a knunya and won't give it back, right? So let's see. Rabbi Meir savar shtar she'ein bo achrayut nechasim mi mishabdehu de lo gabe abav bnei chore magbe gabe. According to this, not like Shmuel, the way we understood Rabbi Meir originally. If it doesn't have a lien on property, so you can't collect it from the land you sold to Jane, but I can collect it directly from you. And that's why we give it back, because you admit you owe the money and I think you owe the money. So great, we give it back to me and I can collect only from you. I have no worry about date messing up or anything like that because we're not collecting it from land. So it's not a problem because it's not land related document. Rabbanan savre mi meshabde nami gabe. And the rabbis say, even remember, achrayut ta'ut safer. Here finally it comes up in the Gemara. They don't use those words. But the rabbis say, even if it doesn't have a achrayut, it's as if there's a achrayut. It is lien to property. If it's lien to property, what's the problem? Maybe, well, it could be maybe the date is off, but the commentaries really say here, the concern is since we can collect it from property, we're worried about a piraon and a knunya. We're worried about a conspiracy. But if you claim you pay back the money already, we basically, everyone agrees that we believe you. And therefore, you're believed, and therefore I don't get it back, because if I got it back, I would try to collect it, and I can't collect it. So that's the way they explain it. Now we're going to say, and we're going to end with this, Tanya Kavate de Rabbi Yochanan. I'm now going to bring a braita that supports Rabbi Yochanan. V'tiyufta de Rabbi Elazar b'chadu, tiyufta de Shmuel b'tarte. And it's going to go against Rabbi Elazar in one way, and Shmuel in two ways. Now they're going to say, now we kind of saw that Shmuel and Rabbi Elazar matched up. And in fact, they're going to say here, they're going to start with the braita, and then they're going to show how it contradicts Rabbi Elazar specifically. And it's going to say, but it contradicts Rabbi Elazar on 2 points, not on one, and we're going to be left with that question today. So I'll leave up the chart because it shows it all well, and I specifically underlined the lines in the braita that create the problem, and I also charted them out here, where we have the braita and Rabbi Yochanan as saying these 2 points, and Rabbi Elazar says the opposite on those 2 issues, and that's the contradiction. So again, this is all good review because we're just reviewing these concepts again. So here goes the braita. You find these documents on the ground. They have a property lien. Even though they both admit that you admit that you still owe the money, I claim you still owe me the money. Lo yachzir lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. The only possible reason for that would be chayash l'knunya, right? We're worried about a knunya. Okay, this is the first part. We're going to put on the chart. It's actually the second thing on the chart because of the way the Gemara organized it. That shows the braita holds there's a knunya, which is what Rabbi Yochanan also said. And Rabbi Elazar said, nobody thinks there's a knunya. Okay, you can look back up at the chart if you want to see, but that's Rabbi Elazar's position. So already that's contradiction number one. If there's no property lien, this is giving all the possibilities. Okay. First we had, right, they're modeh, and there was achrayut. Now we're in no achrayut, and we're going to go through the two possibilities. Either the lova admits, or the lova doesn't admit. Either you say there's still a loan, or you say there is no loan. If you admit, we give it back to the malveh. Okay, I get it back because, right, if we don't, okay, and if it doesn't have a property lien, then there's no worry about a conspiracy because no land to get back. It's I'm only can collect it from you. So if you admit you owe me the money, obviously I can get it back. But if the lova doesn't admit, then nobody gets it back. That's Rabbi Meir. Why is that? Shaya Rabbi Meir omer, shtarei sheyesh b'machrayut nechasim goveh minechasim meshuabadim, v'she'ein behem achrayut nechasim goveh minechasim b'nei cholin. Rabbi Meir says what? And this goes against Rabbi Elazar and Shmuel. Rabbi Meir holds that if it doesn't have achrayut nechasim, you can still collect it. Remember, Shmuel had that approach. Rabbi Elazar quoted it also, that according to Rabbi Meir, you can't, if it didn't have achrayut nechasim, it's an invalid document. You can't collect from anything. But this braita says you could collect from free property, meaning I could collect from you. Okay? And that's because the rabbis say, even though you didn't write it, it's as if you wrote a property. So to you, to Rabbi Elazar, now comes the Gemara's question. This isn't a difficulty for Rabbi Elazar on one issue. This is on two issues, the Amar. And here they're just going to repeat what I just said, which is, Rabbi Elazar said, and this is why I did the chart in this order. Rabbi Meir, he said, according to Rabbi Meir, if the star doesn't have a property lien, you can't collect from any property. And the braita said the opposite, right? And the second thing Rabbi Elazar said is, Bein Rabbi Meir, Bein Rabbanan, lo chashin l'knunya. He said nobody's concerned for a conspiracy here. And braita, now we're going to see the two things of the braita that go against this, which we already did. Braita katane shtar she'en bo achrayut nechasim mishabdehu de lo gave barhami bnei choremi bagabe. The braita said that according to Rabbi Meir, if it doesn't have a property lien, you can't collect it from property, but you can collect it from free money. And katane bein Rabbi Meir, bein Rabbanan, chashin l'knunya. That was in the first line, right? If there's a achrayut, even if they both admit that there's a loan here, you still don't return it because you're worried about this conspiracy. Right? Even though they both admit, you don't return to anyone. And finish with the last words. We're left with the question. This is two problems with Rabbi Elazar, not just one. So tomorrow we'll see how we resolve that small problem. That was minor compared to all the complicated things we did today. So again, really what we did today is we read this Mishna. The first part was to try to understand Rabbi Meir's approach, who distinguishes between achrayut nechasim and achrayut nechasim. One approach was to say it's a case where the lova admits. Within that, we had two explanations, either Rav Asi or Abaye, how this was different, right? Why our Mishnah works in light of the Mishnah in Bava Batra. Then we went with Shmuel's, or potentially might be Shmuel's approach, that the Mishnah would be talking about Ein Chayav Modeh, where the lova doesn't admit, and the concern is a different concern. And that's really because the shtar is invalid, right? If you admit that you claim, that you paid back the money already, we don't let me collect it all, not from anything. And therefore, right, what's the issue? Well, we could give it back to me as long as there's no property lien, right? That's all. If there's no property lien, if there's property lien, it's valid. But, if there's property lien, we're worried. But anyway, let's focus on, if there's no achrayut nechasim, you can't collect. If you can't collect, then, well, I get it back. So if I can collect, I get it back so I can put it as a cover on my pots or on my jugs. And then we saw Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. We moved to the Eretz Yisrael view of the sugya, which really isn't much different. It's just they couched it a little differently because they were debating which case do the rabbis and Rabbi Meir disagree. With that, we got more into also what's the rabbi's opinion. And they have a difference of opinion also based on whether we're choshesh for this knunya or whether there's other issues here, whether they hold like Rabbi Meir, there's really two basic issues. Are you choshesh for knunya or not? And that kind of came to a head as we saw this braita, which strengthens one opinion brings difficulty on another opinion, which is two major issues. Are you choshesh for knunya? And if you have a shtar without a achrayut nechasim, does Rabbi Meir think this is a valid shtar that you could collect with? Or does he think you can't even collect, right? Can you collect from free money, or can you not even collect from this at all? And with that, that was a review of our complicated sugya. I know it's a very hard sugya. It's the kind of sugya that if you have the time, I know most people with Daf Yomi don't, if you have the time to review it, or even just use the charts and go through the daf using the study guide, if your Hebrew is good enough to follow. If not, even you can visualize. You can, if you get some of the words, you can see with the charts what the differences are. And with that, might be a good review of the stuff. Wishing everybody a good day and b'sorot tovot.